My name is Joel Wallace. I'm the PEARS support team lead, and today we're going to be going over the PSE site activities module in PEARS. So we have basically two parts of this webinar. I'm going to walk through the module, and then we'll pause periodically for some questions via the chat box. And then after that, Lauren Whetstone will have some slides covering some specific protocols for California, as well as some other general notes and comments. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen as we get started here. All right, so this is PEARS. PEARS stands for Program Evaluation and Reporting System. It's a tool that is being used by many states, one of which is California, to collect SNAP-Ed evaluation data and report out on it. Now, a few notes. I'm going to preempt a few questions that I know we're going to get. PEARS for this fiscal year, federal fiscal year 17, is only going to be used to collect PSE site activity data. For your direct education and indirect education, all other things, you will use whatever system you're using previously, whether that be the ATF or another system. Now, for federal fiscal year 18, so beginning this October, then we'll be using PEARS to collect all the data. It will be the sole system for California SNAP-Ed for data collection regarding the program implementation and evaluation. So we'll touch on some dates that are particular to that later on, but I know we're going to get questions on that, so I'll make that comment now. Also, because we're focusing on just the PSE module today, I'll show you where some of the other modules are, but we aren't going to address them because we'll have further trainings at a later date to be determined. So again, there's other modules in here that we'll cover at some point, just not today. That being said, let's start in and talk about what you see here on the screen. This is the home page or dashboard once you log into PEARS, and yours might look something slightly different or similar. The numbers might be different, but this should be the basic layout of what you see. And we'll go through each of these portions and what they mean. This top section, the overview section, is specific to direct education, and it's specific to you as a user. So you probably won't see anything there right now for this fiscal year. That's okay. You don't need to worry about that. But once we start tracking direct education in the system, then you'll start to see some numbers populate. Likewise, success stories are not being captured in PEARS for this fiscal year. So you'll see something like this prompting you to create a success story, but you don't need to yet. That will come in the next fiscal year. The one section here that you really do want to pay attention to is this unfinished items down here at the bottom. It has a list of items in the system that are not marked as complete yet that we still need data for or need you to verify that they're ready to be reported on. Here we have a couple of PSE site activities that I started but haven't finished yet. And so it's letting me know that there's still work to be done, even if it's just marking them as complete before they're ready to be reported on. Over here on the right, we have some notifications. That's something our support team uses to let folks know what changes we've made to the system, or if there's deadlines coming up, we'll post those in notifications, as well as a recent activity box that will let you know what you've been working on recently and provide you with links to get right back to that. The menu up top is set up to kind of in two portions. The first is the main portion, I guess, is for where we want to plan and track and analyze what we're doing. So plan right now means planning your survey instrumentation, what evaluation instruments you're going to be using for direct education. So that means we won't be keying in on this today, and we won't be using this for this fiscal year. Underneath the track menu, we're going to track what data we have and track what we're doing. And so we have right now 6, soon to be 7 different modules for collecting data. The only one that we're going to be worried with today is the PSE site activities. So even though we have partnerships and coalitions, and soon we'll have social marketing and these other modules, right now all that we're keyed in on is the PSE site activities. Once we have data in the system, we might want to take it out and analyze it. So we can do that 2 ways. There are reports available. One is the EARS data that's used for federal reporting. So each implementing agency creates the data in the EARS report and then sends that on up the food chain. So if you want to see what the federal report looks like, the EARS data is a way to see what's being collected there. And one of the reasons to use PEARS is that as we get all the data in here, we can generate most of the numbers necessary for PEARS automatically. We also have exports where you can get the data back out into Excel and work with it further in your program of choice, if that's SPSS or just Excel or other things. So we'll touch on that briefly and show you what an export of the PSE site activities might look like. Over here on the right, we have some different icons. Some of these may look different depending on your permissions, what your role is. The first one here is a search icon or a magnifying glass, and that's going to allow you to search across different modules on the site for data. So if you're looking for something but you're not sure which module it's in, this is a place to go to. The next one is a little cog icon or gear, and this is something that is only used for administrators. So those who are able to manage users and create and manage user accounts, or those who are tasked with managing sites, merging duplicate sites, editing sites, things like that. And then we have some tools specific to our team. So this icon won't show up for most users, just the few who are administrators. The next icon is our support and resources icon. You'll actually see this embedded throughout the site as we link to our documentation. So we have on the support page, if we open that up, we'll see here we have a lot of how-to articles, guides, frequently asked questions, a lot of documentation about how to do everything in the system, including PSE site activities. We also have contact information. So here we can you can reach out to our support team, and you can either email us or call us. We staff our support center from 8 to 5 Central on Monday through Friday. So feel free to reach out to us if you have questions or need help, or use this contact form. We also have resources available. These are just a set of links that we can use that will point you towards the SnapEd toolkit, the framework, other things like that. And then we have the directory, and the directory is what we can use to track who has permissions to do various tasks in the system. So we can see here the organizational administrators and user managers. These are people who can add new users, grant existing users permissions, as well as deactivate users who have left the organization. Organization users and programming managers are those who are able to go in and manage the site list for PEARS and either merge duplicates, edit and update sites, or in some cases delete sites. Anyone in the system can add sites, and we'll touch on that briefly as well. Then the last thing you'll see is your name all the way on the right, and then your organization, and then at least the manage account and sign out link. The switch organization only appears for those who have access to multiple organizations. So most users, again, won't see this. But under Manage Account, then we have the ability to update our information, manage some permissions, which we'll touch on as well, and change our password should we need to. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into the PSE module and start talking about how to create data here. And just so everyone knows, if you have questions, please put those in the chat box and we'll try and answer them as we're able. We will pause for any questions after each section. So if you have questions, go ahead and type those in as you have them, and then we'll answer those at the end of the section generally. If you have questions that might come later, we might hold off and answer those as they come up as we approach those in the system. So with the PSE site activities module, let's go ahead and create a new PSE site activity. So we're going to create a new record. We click Add. And you'll notice a couple of things here. The first is this progress bar and this gray box over here on the right-hand side of the page is going to help us know how much data we have left to enter, or how close we are to marking this PSE site activity as complete. What complete means in PEARS terminology is not that the PSE work is no longer happening. It's not that you're done and that no changes are happening, you're not working at that site anymore. Rather, it means that we have a complete set of data ready for reporting for this reporting period, for this fiscal year. So one of the things you'll notice here up at the top is that, and this is embedded throughout the module, we're asking specifically for you to report on most of these things as they pertain to the current reporting period. There are a couple of exceptions to that, and we'll touch on those, but generally we want you to focus on what's happening during October 1st, 2016 through September 30th, 2017. And then that time frame will shift here in the next year. You'll also notice that most of these fields are bolded and have a red asterisk or star. Those mean that they are required, and so the system will not let you save this section of the module until you have completed or put valid information and data in those fields. So the first one of those is going to be a site or organization. Now, Lauren's going to touch more on the difference between sites and organizations and where it's appropriate to use each one later on. But here we can pull from that list of sites, and I can say that I want to work at elementary school, and I'm going to work at West Creek Elementary. So that's the site I'm partnering with, I'm working with here. And so I choose that. Now, if I was making changes not at just a site level, but at the organizational level, for instance, I was getting a school district to change their policies, systems, and some of the environment, then I could choose that district as the organization. Now, again, Lauren will touch on this more later, but be careful of which you're choosing and read the help text here if you're not sure which to choose, because we want to make sure that we're attributing these changes to the appropriate places. So think about that. The next field is a new one this year. It's called intervention name, and this is used for the EARS report, that federal reporting that we will have to complete at the end of the year. And these generally follow the list of settings. So these are worded slightly differently, and some things might be grouped, but generally we're looking at splitting out our interventions into these setting names. And that's because each state has to group their PSEs and other data into different interventions as they report on it to FNS. So we're going to choose schools as our intervention name since we're working at West Creek Elementary. And then we're also going to choose a unit. Now, units in PEARS are primarily used for granting permissions. So we can choose the county that's specific to what we're working with, and we can say that maybe we're working in Nevada County. I'm not sure where West Creek Elementary School is, but we'll choose Nevada County. And what that means is anyone who has access to see all the data in Nevada County can now see this PSE site activity. Or anyone who has access to see everything in the Placer Nevada cluster can now see this PSE site activity. Or anyone who has access to see the whole state's data can now see this. So we use that to manage permissions, and it is a required field. Next, we have our priority settings. We want to know specifically whether or not this site is a USDA summer meal site, an Indian reservation, or a military base. These are things that we want to note separately, and so you can check all that apply, in addition to selecting the maybe more general setting. So here we have the different domains: eat, learn, live, play, and shop, and work. And so we can choose the setting that's appropriate for this site, which may be different than the physical site of the physical setting of the site. So for instance, if we were working at a school, we would tend to choose schools, this setting here. However, if we were working at the after-school program located at that school, then we would want to choose the after-school programs setting. Next, we have a list of intervention topics. Here you can choose one or more topics that you're targeting through your PSE work. So if we're focused on fruits and vegetables and maybe participation in sports and recreational activities, we can choose those as topics. So again, you can choose one or more intervention topics, and that's another new field. The next field is asking for the federal fiscal year in which you first contacted this site to participate in SNAP-Ed funded PSE work. So when did this begin? So if we look at this, I'll zoom in a little bit here. then it helps us by saying if we started this in October, in between October 1st, 2015 and September 30th, 2016, then the fiscal year is 2016. So we would enter a 4-digit year. That's all that we're entering here is just that year. So if this started this year, I would put 2017. This is a new work. It started this fiscal year, and I want to track that. This helps us to track things over time. Next is the stages of implementation. Here we want to choose as many stages as this PSE work was in during the current year. We can choose each one once. So for instance, this year, since this is new work, we contacted them and they agreed to participate. Maybe we also started planning and preparing for implementation of changes. So those are our 2 stages. Now, if we were doing additional stages, we could report those, or maybe just report one stage as appropriate. Next, we have a comments box. This comments box is primarily for your use. It's for you to attach notes that are pertinent to this PSE work, or for you to add clarification comments. So if you want to explain something about the stages of implementation, or you wanted to note something for those who are going to be reviewing this data later on, then the comments box is a prime place to do that. But again, that's optional. The next field is attachment. So this is where we have the option of uploading files to travel with the data. That can include photos, additional documents like PDFs or Word documents, or additional data. Maybe you have some survey data you want captured, and so you can upload that in an Excel file. We don't allow just any type. It's mostly documents, photos, and other data file types. So we don't allow video files, or I can't think of any others that we don't allow off the top of my head. And we also don't allow any file over 100 megabytes. So again, if you're uploading a very large file, if it's over 100 megabytes, then it might not upload successfully. So this is where we're going to attach those files. Okay, I'll pause. Are there questions or comments about the general information screen? And Lauren and Sharon, if you have any comments, feel free to unmute yourself and chime in before we move on. Question is, what type of pictures do we want to have uploaded? That's something that I'll defer on. We can take any type of picture, but I think generally it's going to be photos of the PSE work. Right, Lauren?
Yes, that's. I would say that if you have any pictures, like before and after pictures of some of the PSE work that you're doing, if it was environmental change, for example, or if you had any other photos that you just wanted to share, or if you want with us, but also if you want to have photos associated with your reporting for you also, because remember to think about PEARS not just for reporting and for us to use for reporting to USDA and for state level reports, but also that it will be that it's a tool and a resource that you can use. So if you have photos that you want to associate with this particular site, for example, in the PSE work that you're doing, you could do that also. I don't know, Sharon, if you want to add anything else or.
Let's see, another question, can you edit previously saved entries? Yes, you can. So we'll go over this within the current reporting year, so within this fiscal year. Once you have something saved, you're able to go back and make changes to it and update it as necessary. So if we went ahead and let's click save, it's going to take us back to the overview screen, and maybe I realized that I needed to add an intervention topic. Then I can go back in and edit that, do that, and then I can then save or save and continue. So save will take us back to that overview page of the PSE site activity. Save and continue takes us to the next section for data entry.
And going back to things that you add, at a different point, you're going to be able to go back and attach a tool if needed.
Yes, yeah, you can attach tools as needed here under the file attachments. Um, so we can add a feature. We'll make a note of this to add some more help text around the attachments about what's allowed and not allowed in the system for clarification. Another question, and we'll deal with this more in depth later, but yes, this is a continuation of what was entered last year in that we can track PSE work from year to year, and we'll see how we can copy that forward and build off of what was entered previously. Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next section. So this is needs, readiness, and effectiveness. This is where we're going to track any of the assessments we did about organizational readiness, staff readiness. If we did a needs assessment, we can do that. And so you'll see here that the question is, did you conduct a needs or readiness assessment at this site organization during the current reporting year? So generally we want this to be keyed in on what you've done in the past year. Now, if I'm remembering correctly, I think that for this year, since this is the first time a lot of you have been using PEARS, then you can enter needs assessments results from previous years so that they get attached to the work. So it doesn't have to be just this year when we're reporting it for federal fiscal year 17, but generally we're looking for an accurate picture of what's happened this year. But since we're doing some catch-up work and some of these things have been going on prior to this year, then you can select yes and it'll ask you more questions, or if we select no, we would just continue on. So we select yes, then it's going to ask us what type of assessments we did and allows us to attach one of each type of assessment. So for instance, I can say I did a needs assessment and then I choose what instrument I used. So I can say I used the Smarter Lunchroom Self-Assessment Scorecard. I can get the approximate date that this was administered. So again, this is doesn't have to be the exact date, and maybe you entered it over the course of 3 or 4 days or a week. Then just choose a date in that date range. It doesn't have to be the exact one. So we just get a general idea of time frame, and then you can optionally briefly describe those results. So we could say this is generally what we noticed or found from the assessment. And then likewise, you can do the same thing for the follow-up assessment. So if we were to come back later and do a follow-up, we could report those things here. Or maybe we don't do a follow-up until the next year, then we just fill out the baseline this year, and next year we could add a follow-up and attach that later on. Questions on needs, readiness, and effectiveness? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and move to the next section. The next section is strategy, and here we're trying to track some of what was happening at the site and how were SNAP-Ed funds and people being used. So we start off by asking what complementary activities were implemented at the site organization during the current reporting year. So if we were doing other things at the site besides just PSE work, then we could check the appropriate boxes. So whether that was evidence-based education or marketing or parent or community involvement, we can check those things. One question we've had before is what is involved in marketing? Would indirect education count as marketing? I think what we're generally recommending is that if it's related to the PSE work, if whatever you're promoting is part of the PSE work that you're doing at this site, then that marketing is what you would want to check here. If it's something completely different, then that's a different type of marketing and may not be what you want to track. We can also track what programs, packages, or initiatives were used as part of the PSE effort. So we'll see here we have a list of a lot of different programs and initiatives and things like that. So if we wanted to say, well, we're doing the Smarter Lunchroom movement, then we can attach that. We can attach as many programs, packages, and initiatives as are necessary. So we could go in and select Sugar Bites as well if we wanted to do that. Next is a section on how funds or people from SNAP-Ad are being used in this work. And so we'll see that we have 6 different items here, and then we get to choose for each of those items whether or not SNAP-Ad funds or people were playing a lead or major role. So this is where those SNAP-Ad funds or people were the primary motivation and initiator behind different things. A supportive role where they may have helped contribute to it, but they weren't the primary people or it wasn't the primary funding source. No role, not involved, it existed, but it wasn't involved, or not applicable. So maybe for whatever reason, there was something that it didn't apply in this situation, so there wasn't an opportunity to have a role. So for each of these, we just want to choose what kind of role we played, and then we have an option to specify any other ways not listed above that SNAP-Ad funds or people contributed. So you can, if something isn't captured by one of these 6 items, go ahead and just enter that into the text box here and note that. And then down here at the bottom, we want to track if any youth were actively involved in shaping the PSE through an established group. And if so, then we get in a number of those youth. And if not, then we don't worry about that. But that way, since most of the time adults are the ones who are moving on this PSE work and they're implementing the PSE work, shaping that, then when there are youth actively involved in that, that's worth particularly noting. So that's what we're tracking there. Questions on the strategy section? Does anyone have any questions about strategy, the strategy section of the PSE module? Okay, quiet group so far. Must be a Friday afternoon. All right. The next section is changes adopted. Hopefully, if we're doing PSE work, then that means that there's things that are changing, changes that are happening at the systems level or environmental level, policy level. And so what we can do is we can attach or add changes here. So you'll notice this add change button. And so then we have a list of a lot of different changes. And so we can say, well, we're doing things with the menu. So we want to note that we changed the systems by improving menu or recipes and things like that. And so we can add as many changes as is pertinent, as is helpful for this site organization. Now, going back to that, remember that these changes should be implemented at the site organizational level. So if we chose a specific site, like we chose one specific elementary school, then these changes need to be happening at this site. It's not changes that we intended to do. It's not changes that, if it's at the organization level, that apply to members of that organization. So if it's at the school district, well, these were changes that happen at individual schools, and so we'll say that it's underneath the organization. This is what's related specifically to that site or organization, those changes. So we can attach as many there. If we don't find something in the list, then there's a text box where we can list those. So if there's something not found in this list of changes, then feel free to note that here in that text box. We also want to track the reach of the changes that we're making. And so when we're tracking reach, we have some documentation on this, documentation on calculating reach. And so as we look at that, it's going to explain a lot of, it's going to give us some examples, it's going to give us definitions of the different terms here, so the direct contact versus unduplicated, and then different examples per setting or change, and then the methods used here. So what we're looking to do is for the total number reached, we choose a method. So if we don't have any reasonable basis for a number there, we're just going to choose unknown. We don't have to say anything beyond that. We don't know the total number reached, and that's fine. If we have a a hard number, then we can choose measured. And so this is where we have an exact number. We've got really good data here. So we'll choose the source of the data, like a survey of the target audience, and then report the total number reached. So maybe that's 500 individuals were reached by this PSE work. And then we can also choose estimated if we have a reasonable basis for an estimate, but we don't have exact numbers. So for instance, if someone involved in this site organization were to say, well, there were approximately this many people involved in the event that we held and that was part of the PSE work, then you can use that as a reasonable basis as something to get an idea of how many people were reached. We do the same thing again but separately for the characteristics, the demographics of those reached. So if we don't know, we just click unknown. If we have really good data, then we can choose measured and then enter the percentages by these different characteristics. So you don't have to have a total number to get the characteristics, and you don't have to have characteristics to have a total number. You can do one or the other, and then you'll just input the general characteristics of those participants or those that you reached, either via measured or estimated or unknown. So if you had a lot of people that didn't reply to the survey, or you don't really have much data, then you might want to choose unknown. Generally, we want you to be able to report when you have good data, but you aren't forced to report things if you may not have high quality data to work with. So that's why we have these unknown options here. Okay, questions on changes adopted, this section, any changes or reach questions or comments?
Joel, there was a question at the very beginning about, from someone who asked about where do we enter decline to answer data under characteristics of those reached, and also a question about delivery people. And I think that those questions are specifically related to the program activity section and not the PSE activity section. So I just wanted to I think it says Era Cassie. Sorry if I said that wrong, but I just wanted to let you know that that will be covered in the other training that we'll do for the program activity for the full PEARS system that we'll do likely in October.
Yeah, very good. Thank you for catching that, Lauren. Yes, we will be covering the direct education or program activities later on here in October.
And it looks like somebody also had a question from the previous section about adding a definition for lead role versus support role. I don't know, Joel, if that's something we can either put that in our FAQ, because we will be typing up like an FAQ document based on the questions that we had during the session, or if that's something that can be added. Or maybe it's already there. I'm not sure.
Yeah, let's see. I'm not sure if we have. We can add that to our documentation. We'll make a note of that and add that to our documentation as well. So that's noted.
Okay.
Looks like another question. Is it preferred to begin to gather more demographic data versus using the unknown option? Lauren, correct me here, but I'm assuming yes, that having more data is better, but we just want to make sure it's quality data, that we're not just entering numbers we make up. So if you have the ability to gather more demographic data and can enter that, that's great. If you don't, then entering unknown is what you should be doing.
Yes, I would agree that we would prefer, I mean, certainly it's great, as Joel said, if you can get it, but we would definitely prefer to have you select unknown than to give us data that you don't feel very confident or that isn't very accurate. So it's always an option.
Okay, any other questions about changes adopted section before we move forward? Okay. Our next section is individual effectiveness. And this is where, if we're tracking at an individual level the impact or the effectiveness of this PSE work, then we want to select yes, that we are evaluating individual level effectiveness for PSE work at this site or organization during the current reporting period. So if we aren't doing that, if maybe we have some evaluation data from this school, but it's related to direct education, not PSE work, then we want to select no. We're not evaluating individual level effectiveness for the PSE work in that case. That would be for something else. But let's say that we are evaluating individual level effectiveness. We're going to select yes, and then it's going to ask us about tools and indicators. So under the individual level assessment tools, we can add a tool and then choose a type here. So we can say that we did a survey and we were using maybe the food behavior checklist, and we did that approximately at the beginning of August. And then we could describe the results here. We can also, there are other types available. We can choose that we report that we did an interview, a focus group, or a direct observation. And so we can add as many of those tools as we needed to show how we evaluated this individual level effectiveness. So we could add another one and say that we also did direct observation on that date, and then we could optionally describe those results. So that's the individual level assessment tools. And then we also have the ability to track what indicators we're intending to evaluate at the individual level. So from the STAT-BED framework, the evaluation framework here, there are approximately 51, I think, different indicators. Yes, 51 indicators. And so we can choose what our primary indicator is that we're really intent on evaluating. And so maybe that is healthy eating behaviors, medium term 1. And then we can choose what measures, outcome measures, we're intending to evaluate. So that they ate more than one kind of fruit and more than one kind of vegetable. And then maybe the amount of fruit, the cups of fruit consumed per day and cups of vegetables consumed per day. So those are things that we're really intent on evaluating. We can optionally include secondary indicators that are of secondary importance if we're evaluating other indicators and metrics, but they maybe not in as great detail as what we're doing with our primary indicator. So that secondary indicator piece is optional. We don't have to have that. Questions about the individual effectiveness. Let's see, can we provide a specific example of individual effectiveness? Lauren or Sharon, if you have specific examples, you can chime in. I believe that this is where maybe if, for instance, we're intending to evaluate the change that the Smarter Lunchroom movement had on students and staff, then we can say that there were these changes, and because we had this policy that was, and the system was changed, and what the menu offerings were, then at the individual level, students reported that they were now eating more vegetables or eating more fruit because of this PSE work, this change that took place. So we can see what the effectiveness is of the PSE work as it pertains to individuals. Is that an accurate example, Lauren and Sharon?
That's correct. It's rather than doing pre-post tests of your direct education, it's looking at the effect of your PSE activity.
And Sharon, I'm correct in saying that it could be possible that you're doing direct education at that same PSE site also. But we're really here trying to see, were you making an effort, or did you during this year look at change in individual behavior at the places where you were doing PSE work?
That's correct. You don't have to be doing individual education, and you do have to be doing PSE, and any measure that you do has to relate directly to the PSE that you were doing.
Right. Yep.
Very good. Thank you. Any other questions or comments about the individual effectiveness section? Okay. Moving right along. The next section is called recognition and media coverage. This is where we want to track any awards, any media coverage, or other recognitions that this site organization may have received related to the PSE work here. So again, this is during the current reporting year, and if we don't have anything to report, maybe there was no media coverage, no awards, then we just click the no recognition and media coverage to report, and that'll get us a check mark, and we could proceed on to the next section, and that's fine. If we do have something to report, we can add that with the big green button, and then we can choose the type. We can choose that it was an award, either something that was new, something that was renewed at the same level, so it was bronze last year, bronze this year, or something that increased in level, so it was bronze last year and silver this year. And so if we choose an award, it's going to ask us the name of the award, the recognizing body, what level it is, and the approximate date it was received. If we ask or say that we're going to track media coverage, we want to know what the coverage type was, whether it was local or national, something on a partner's website, social media, or another media outlet covered it, and we can specify that. And then we want to give a name or brief description of the coverage, a link or a reference, which if you don't have, you can put none. If you have those details, then that's great. If there's a link, do that. But so we could say this is local news, and it was something that was on the TV last night, and they covered menu changes at school. They talked about how this new menu is great for kids. That's fantastic. So we can note that and say maybe based off of what the local station's viewership numbers are, that reached approximately 5,000 people. That's not required, so if you aren't sure, again, don't fill anything in. And then the approximate date of the coverage. So if that was last night, we can choose that. And then we just click add, and that'll save, and we could then continue to add more awards or media coverage. So if this is something that gets covered at multiple levels, we can track that. Or if that's all we have, then we can continue on to the next section. So yes, you can add multiple recognition or media coverage. You just add one, and you can go back and add another. So if we do that, then you can see we can just continue to add as many awards or recognition or media coverage that we have. Other questions about this section, recognition and media coverage? Okay. So in the next section then is sustainability. And so again, it's going to ask if we have taken any efforts to support sustainability. And so if we say no, this is just starting out, this is the first year, we haven't really laid any of that groundwork, we just select no and move on. So again, I want to reinforce that saying no or unknown or not providing data is better than providing bad data. So wherever you can provide great data, provide us with the data we need to evaluate this. But if you haven't done those things, don't make things up, just select no and move on. So here, let's say that we did track sustainability, so we can show this off. And so we have different sustainability mechanisms. These are ways that maybe we're trying to ensure sustainability. And so we started a list of 5 different items that we want to track, but you can also list other mechanisms and track those as well. So we could specify something there. And so for each of these mechanisms, then we want to list whether or not we have plans to adopt this, whether it's in process and being adopted, or whether or not this has already been adopted, this is in place and it's stable. So is there an organization or group that's not dependent on SNAP-Ed funds that's assumed responsibility for sustaining the efforts? Well, we have plans to adopt that, but nothing's happened yet. Dependable ongoing source of funding that's other than SNAP-Ed that's been identified. Well, that's in process. We're working on that. If there's policies that were adopted that require the change to be maintained, we can report that. And if we answer plan to adopt to fully in place, it's going to actually ask us another question about that we'll cover in a moment. We can say whether or not there's a monitoring system and support from stakeholders. And support from stakeholders will also ask us for some additional information. So here we can say what levels this policy that was adopted or that we're planning to adopt, what levels is that at. So it's at the site level, but also the agency level and maybe the state government. They all have policies that are requiring this change to stick around. That's great. So we would check as many as appropriate. Likewise, for the stakeholder groups, we can choose which groups are going to help sustain this effort. So the consumers are, the staff and teachers are, so the students, staff and teachers, and then maybe an elected official has said that they're going to help make sure that we have better menus in our lunchrooms. So we can track all of those things here. Then if, we don't have to, but if we used a sustainability framework or assessment tool, we can track one of those. There is a other please specify, but also we can say none, we didn't use one, and then provide a brief description of results if we did use one. So that's the sustainability section. Let's see, questions. Can you jump from the topics listed in the progress bar, or do you have to complete the previous section to move on? You can jump around. So if I were to save this section, I could go back to strategy. So these are all links where you can jump around, and you could, besides general information being the first and mark as complete being the last, after we completed general information, we could jump straight down to recognition, then come back and do needs and readiness later. So we tried to lay these out in a logical order, but if you want to complete those in a different order, then as long as they all get completed, that's fine.
I think, Joel, I'll add that I can see, you know, for this year, as in the last couple of years for PSE reporting, we're asking you to give us, you know, a complete report of your FFY, where are we, 17 PSE work. But in the future, this will be available, you know, the PEARS system for PSE reporting and the other program activity reporting will be available on an ongoing basis, so it won't be just done annually. So I could see how you would then use that more often. Like this year, you might really just go down since you're reporting, but in future years, as you're, you know, if you get to recognition, but you haven't done some of the other things, you could go ahead and mark that in there. So certainly you can jump around from section to section.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Other comments or questions about the sustainability section? Okay. Cruising right along. Okay, so this section, the reflection section, is one that is essentially completely optional. We want you to look at it and answer as much as you're willing to, but none of the questions on this page are required. So what we're trying to do via this reflection section is gather more data about how well this work was completed, or what was easy, what was hard, things like that. And that information, that data then helps your administrators know what tools and trainings they can provide to help you take advantage of assets, overcome barriers, do PSE work more efficiently and effectively. And so as much as you're willing to do, please take time to complete the reflection. And so you can list up to 5 assets and barriers, the major assets or barriers that you encountered. It doesn't have to be 5. You could just do 1, you could do 3, or you could do all 5. And the same thing for barriers. We can track anything else that you might, beyond the 5 that you want to track. And then we have several other questions about how things could have improved, what lessons you learned, any additional comments or feedback here. So again, you'll notice that none of these have a red asterisk. They're all optional, but we do strongly encourage you, if you have time, to complete some of them. That will help give us some feedback and some information to better equip you all to do this PSE work in the future. Questions or comments about reflection? Okay, not seeing any. Then the last piece of this is going to be marking the PSE site activity as complete. So I mentioned this at the beginning that we want this to be complete. What this complete idea means is that not that this isn't going to proceed on to the next year, but rather that for this reporting year, this fiscal year, we've captured all the data. So it's going to get marked as complete towards or at the end of the reporting year. And once we do that, we get a message, this is successful, and you'll notice that we can't edit this any longer. So if we look back at our overview page, we have a little green completed tag here. We can't edit, we can't delete. We have a 100% progress bar, and that means this is getting included in reports by default. And that's why we don't want it being edited. If you change something while somebody's running reports, then it can throw off those reports. Now you can mark it as incomplete. So if we go back and click the Mark as Incomplete button, we'll notice we're back down on the progress bar, and these have all changed back in the links, so we could go back and make updates. So for instance, if there was one last minute award that you wanted to log, you could jump back in and do that, but do that, then come back and mark it as complete again. That's so that we know that you're saying this is a complete data set. I have all the data that's pertinent for this reporting period entered. It's ready to be included in reports. If you don't mark it as complete, then we don't know. Maybe you have all the checkboxes except mark as complete. We don't know if you have all the data entered yet. Maybe you still have some things you're going to go back and add additionally. And so please do work to mark these as complete. Some other notes about PSE site activities. We do have the ability to look at them and filter this list of PSE site activities by things like setting or unit or user. By the default is that you're only going to see your own data for the current reporting period. And the default permissions are likewise that you only see your own data, although you can see it for any reporting period. And so if you need to see someone else's data, contact one of your administrators and they can help you get that access. But we can copy what we were doing last year to this year. So if I click this copy button, I don't actually have anything entered from the last year, so I can't copy it forward, but all it would look like is a list of PSEs just like this with checkboxes over here on the left. And I could check as many as I wanted to copy forward. So if I was working at all 3 of these schools the next year, I could check boxes next to their names and then click copy, and it would copy them to the current reporting period. So that way I could say, well, I was working on this last year and I'm going to continue working on it this year, and when it copies over, most of this, almost all of this will be empty because almost all of it is specific to the reporting period. That most of the general information will stay, but things like needs and readiness and effectiveness, the changes adopted, individual effectiveness, recognition, media coverage, those types of things will be wiped out, and you would re-enter those. They're logged in the last year, but for this year, we would want to log fresh data. Questions about anything related to entering PSE site activities. We're going to cover permissions and how to get data out of the system yet, but are there any questions about either of those parts, anything related to entering? Okay, doesn't look like it. So we'll touch briefly on getting the data out. So we can export these PSE site activities, and then if we click export, then it gives us an Excel file of that data, and that's going to be something that has a code book. Oh, let me get this. This code book describes all the different data that we have, what filters were applied, all the different fields by worksheet, and then we have different worksheets where we have one record or one row per PSE. We can see what changes took place here at a given site or things like that. So all the data gets put into this file, and this is one of the tools that your administrators will use when evaluating this for your organization. Let's see, the question, can you copy current PSE sites as a template for other PSE site entry? Currently, we don't have a copy button that allows you to copy something in the current reporting period because things are distinctive enough that we haven't enabled that. We can think about adding that as a feature, so we'll make a note to talk about that. But currently, no, you can't create a copy of something in the current year. You can just copy what was last year over to note that you're continuing to work on it. Okay, the other thing I want to cover, and then I'm going to turn this over to Lauren, is under Manage Account, the permission section. We have essentially 3 different types of permissions in the system, or well, 2 that are applicable for you all, and one of those is viewable unit permissions. So this is where you as a user are given permission to see all the data in a certain unit. So you can see over here in this summary on the right of my permissions, I have permissions to see all the data in these units. I can see all the data in the state of California for this organization. And your administrators can grant those permissions. So not everyone will see this edit viewable unit permissions. It's only the administrators. So reach out to them if you need permissions to see everything in your county or area. The other type of permissions is editable permissions. This is where we can grant other users the ability to edit our data. And so I can say, well, Aaron Schroeder and Ron Wiederholt, these 2 have the ability to log into their accounts and then edit and see my data. So if I'm collaborating, then they can work on that and help me enter data, maybe things like that. Now, notice that if I look at my permission summary over here, that's a one-way thing. So when I list somebody here, so I list Angie here and save that, then now Angie has access to my account, but if we look at who's given me access to their account, Angie hasn't given me access to her account yet. So she doesn't show up in that list, and I won't be able to see her data. So one of the reasons that we do this is we want you as the user to be aware of who has the ability to edit your data. So you have to grant these permissions. Your administrators can't give someone else edit access. No one else can do that except you. So that's the edit permissions, and then other people, the people listed, will be able to see your data as well as edit it. Let's see. Questions about anything that I've covered so far? Let's see, you may have said this already. Is historical ATF data going to be loaded into PEARS in fiscal year 18? ATF data will be, what you did enter in ATF will now be entered in PEARS as of fiscal year 18. So for the rest of this fiscal year, up until October 6th, which is the data entry deadline, then you're going to be entering just PSE work in PEARS, and everything else goes in your ATF or in another system you might be using. After that date, so after October 6th, then everything will end up in PEARS, and you won't be using ATF to track that any longer.
And I think the question might have also been is our past ATF, will past ATF data be loaded into PEARS?
Okay. I don't think we've talked in depth about that. There's not plans to load that in at this point, I guess. Maybe would be the most accurate answer.
Yeah. Well, and Joel, didn't you say earlier in the week in another webinar that right now there's not really a mechanism for loading the ATF data so that it can be seen in PEARS, correct? I mean, the data aren't comparable enough, I don't believe, in the formatting.
The structure is, I think, different enough. If it was a dire need, we could look at trying to work something up. But at this point, again, there aren't plans to do that, and just because the data is structured differently enough. Okay, last thing that I will cover before turning it over to Lauren is how to get help. So one of the things that comes with PEARS is our support team. And we do a lot of things to try and help folks out and help them use the system. One of those is, as I showed before, our support documentation, our support site is a searchable knowledge base. So you can say, well, I want to know about documenting REACH. And so it'll pull up all the different things related to REACH. So, hey, there's an article about how to document REACH. And so we have all that here. You can also reach out and contact us. Please, if you have questions, if you're having trouble in the system, feel free to reach out to us and we can help talk you through something or answer questions. We're more than happy to do that. We also have a couple other avenues for support. We do send out a monthly newsletter regarding PEARS. This lists features that are upcoming, things that have recently been done. From time to time, we send out other notifications, but that's wrapped up in part of the support process. And in that newsletter, we actually have every other Wednesday afternoon, we have a Zoom link to an open Q&A session. So where you can jump on and we have somebody from our support team there to answer questions or show you different things in the system should you need that. So again, please, if you need help, feel free to use this phone number or this email and reach out to us. Any other questions about how to enter data in PEARS or anything that I covered before I turn this over? Could you clarify who is assigned administrator status for different counties, who is able to manage users? So that is actually covered in the directory. So organization administrators have access to do just about anything in the system in terms of managing users, and then the user managers are also folks who can add additional users should you need to. So once you get access to PEARS, which we'll cover towards the end here, once you get access to PEARS, then you'll be able to see who to contact to do that. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen and transition it over to Lauren so she can share her slides and start in on her portion.
There. Okay, so everyone can see my slides okay? Joel, that's good? I'm going to, hold on one sec. Hold on. Wait, can you see my slides now?
Yes, I can see the slides.
Okay, I did something, sorry. Okay, there. It's just weird on my, maybe because I have dual monitors. When I do that, then I can't see the chat and stuff anymore. So you'll just have to let me know if there are questions that I can answer in the meantime. So, okay. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. I'm going to just add a little bit to what Joel has told you about PEARS, some of our California-specific instructions. Much of it Joel already covered, so we'll probably get through this fairly quickly. But we were going to start with a poll. So Joel, if you could launch that, that would be great. So we probably should have done this at the very beginning, but it was in with my slides, so we'll do this now. So we're just interested in knowing how many of you are new to the PEARS PSE system for this year. Okay, we'll wait just another second or two. This seems like a fairly consistent pattern for all of our the 3 webinars, and that is a little over half of you did not use PEARS, use the PEARS PSE system for fiscal year 16 reporting. About 20% or so who didn't use it but were familiar with it, and then about 23% who did use the system. So I'm going to close that. Thanks, everybody. That's helpful for us to know. It's just helpful for me to know how many of you have had experience already. So, Okay, so I'm just going to start by going over just a couple of things. And as I said, Joel went through many of these. Just a reminder that the red asterisks indicate all the fields that are required. There are open text fields where open text fields without asterisks, meaning that they are not required. So for many of these, we likely, while we will read the information, we're not likely to use that for reporting. So we won't be using this in the reporting that we do to USDA or in the summary reporting that we do at the state. So I would just encourage you to keep those short, use bullet lists or short phrases. As I said, we will be reading, but probably will not use, do a full qualitative analysis of those responses. But again, I encourage you to use them when they're relevant, because they might be helpful for you also as you go back and look at your entries this year and in future years. So there also are some open text fields that are required that'll have an asterisk next to them. And so we encourage you to type in a response there. But if for some reason you don't have a response, it's not relevant for some reason, just make sure that you type something in there or it won't let you go on. So you can type NA if it's not relevant, or none, or something like that, just so that you can get past that field. But again, because they're required fields, we would encourage you to fill those in. And we are in the process of developing a, actually, I think it's not going to be a PDF version, it's going to be a Word version of the form so that we can send that out to you. It's in the final draft stage. It just needs some review to make sure that we didn't miss anything, and then we'll make that available probably close to when we make the recording of the webinar and everything available. So we should have that next week available for you. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about PSE reporting sort of in general and which sites that you need to report. So first of all, I want to say that we would want you to report on all sites that were at least contacted and agreed to participate during fiscal year 17. Okay, so any site that you at least contacted and they agreed to participate, you will include. And then that also means that you would include all sites that are continuing this year to plan PSE changes, to make PSE changes, to monitor or evaluate PSE changes. Any work that was done related to PSE at a site in fiscal year 17, you should then report that site. So report something for that site. I also just want to encourage you strongly to report on all PSE sites, so all sites where you're working. The PSE PEARS information is serving multiple purposes for this year. One, obviously, is we use it for reporting to USDA, preparing state-level reports, but we're also going to be using the PEARS PSE data for helping us to understand potential exposure to SNAP-Ed interventions. So if we want to, for example, in some of our state level evaluation work, we want to better understand the realm of work, the totality of the work that's being done in a particular geographic location, for example. So we would want to be able to draw on what's entered in FY17 in the ATF, so direct ed, indirect ed, media, and PSE. So we want to make sure that we have all places where PSE work was being done represented in the database. It's also just a great way to make sure that we're truly representing the amount of work that's being done in all of the places where PSE work is being done. And then finally, if it's, we talked about just the earlier situation where there might be a site that was just contacted and agreed to participate, but there really wasn't much work done there. In that case, you'll just fill out what's relevant, just the applicable section. So it may not be that much to fill out. So we just encourage you to do that, even if there wasn't a lot of work that was done. Okay, so just a couple of other themes that before I get to the specific sections. We want to also make sure that you report on all PSEs that are occurring at a site. So we talked about reporting all sites that have PSE work, but we also then want to make sure that you're reporting on all PSEs that are occurring at any one site. So we would like you to have just one PSE report per site, no matter how many different PSEs are happening there. So if you're working at a school, for example, and you're working in the school cafeteria, maybe through smarter lunchrooms, and you're working on improving recess, and you're doing some other work around physical activity breaks or physical activity time during PE. We want you to report all of those things. So make sure that you're reporting all of those things. The only exception to that would be that if you, and we're going to talk about this later, so actually maybe I'm going to hold off on that. I'll talk about this other part later. So again, so report on all PSEs that are happening at the site. When you're asked for a day in a month and a year, as Joel mentioned, just pick an approximate date. Generally, this is across anywhere where a day, month, year is required. Just use an approximate date if you don't know the exact date, or if you used a range, just pick an approximate date during that range. And remember that, and Joel demonstrated that, but remember that in most cases, you can choose multiple items from the drop down. And I'm just going to show you real quickly here. I hope you can see this, but you'll see that in this one, and this is just an example, in the strategy section, you'll see that under programs, packages, and initiatives, I had already checked off choices. And I don't have the program open here, but I'll just show you that if you wanted to add another program or a package that you used, you could just click here. Sorry, see, I shouldn't have done that. Every time I do that, I forward my slides, and I don't mean to. That you can just click in that field right there, and the list will pop up again, and you can choose another program, package, or initiative. So there are several places where you have the option of choosing more than one. Okay, so I'm going to go in and do a little bit of detail about each of the sections. But again, Joel, I can't see the chat for whatever reason. So are there any specific questions right now? I just found it. Okay, it doesn't look like there's any. I'll just give a second in case anyone has any questions about those general comments. Okay. All right, so let's go on, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the general information section. So we want to start first by talking about, Joel mentioned that you can select a site or an organization, and I just wanted to define an organization as something like a school district, a retail chain office, for example, the main offices for Head Start. Those would be what we mean by an organization. And here you would pick that only if you're going to report on PSEs that happened at the organizational level. Okay, so it's really not a mechanism for combining sites. So if you did similar things in multiple sites, you would not choose organization in order to just have to do one entry, for example. So what we want to have reported here are organizational level PSEs. So again, you don't include site level PSE changes when you report on organizations, and don't choose organization if you want to lump several sites together. If you have organizational level PSEs that happen, and then you also have, let's say that you had a policy change at a district level, for example, and then you also have school level changes as a result of that policy, then you would do, and you're working with those schools, then you would do a site level report, a school specific report for each of those schools where PSE changes were implemented as a result of the larger organizational change. But it also might just be that you make a change at an organizational level that's not relevant to the individual sites, and then you wouldn't need to report that. And I'm going to give you an example in just a second. Let's see, I just want to make sure I didn't mention anything. Okay, so let's go to the next poll. And what I want you to do in this next poll is to indicate if the following are changes at the organization, if you would choose an organization or choose a site for these kinds of changes. wait just a few seconds. I know people read through them first, so I'm going to give you a few minutes or a few seconds to vote. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and continue to vote if you want. I'm just going to talk a little bit about these. So the first one said strengthen the school district's wellness policy, and about 93% of you said that you would choose the organization, the school district as the organization, and that's correct. That would be an organization. The second one is implemented nutrition standards for classroom parties, and 88% of you chose site for that, and that's correct. So it could well have been that there was an organizational policy at the district level, for example, about classroom parties, but the key word sort of is that you're talking about implementing nutrition standards in specific classrooms and in specific schools, and implementation is sort of the key there, that it's at the site level. The next one is implemented nutrition standards for meetings and events at all district offices. And that's right, about 94% of you chose that's an organizational change, and that's correct. And again, that might be one that just happened at a district office, whether that's a school or a work site. Those were really just for district offices where that policy would apply, and it may or may not be relevant for individual sites. There may not even be individual sites if we're talking about district offices. And then finally, the last one was implemented new PE curricula to increase moderate to vigorous physical activity. And this one was a little bit trickier. 68% said site and 32% said organization. And we intended this to be at the site level. Again, implementing at individual schools, and I know we didn't specifically say individual schools, so that might have made that more obvious, but we were intended here that there may have been an organizational level policy that was adopted, but then implementing at individual schools would be reporting at the site level. So if you worked at individual schools to implement that new PE curriculum, then that would be reported at the site level. Okay. I'm going to close that and see if there are any questions about that, where we were so far. Oh, I'm displaying the answer. Okay, wait, hold on. How would you report policy work with a nonprofit that operates with youth on a school site? Let's see. Sorry, I'm reading a question now. The question is, how would we report policy work with a nonprofit that operates with youth on a school site or multiple school sites? The nonprofit is separate from the school. You know what, I'm going to hold off on that one till I get to another section of my notes, and we may answer your question there, and I'll remember to go back to it when we get there. Okay. And Joel, I'm just going to ask you, are you seeing not my full slides, but the notes?
Yeah, so I think we're seeing just the normal PowerPoint view. It's not the presentation view.
Okay, why? I wonder why, because I'm seeing it. Okay. Because I'm seeing it. Well, I think it's because I have dual monitors, and I'm trying to figure out then how. Maybe I have to hold on one second. I'm going to stop sharing real quick and then reshare. What do you see now?
Now we see the presentation view.
Okay, I think it was because of my dual monitors. It was seeing the wrong thing. Thank you for letting me know that, because they saw the answers down there in my slides. Okay, so now you're seeing the full screen? Correct. Okay, thanks. Yeah, I think my dual monitors were throwing me off there. Okay, so and remind me then to get back to that question about how you would choose the type of site for the example that was given. Okay, so as Joel mentioned, there's also a new field called intervention name. And in intervention name, the main purpose of that field is to summarize our work in California for the EARS report. So I don't know if any of you have looked at the EARS report or look at that ever, but there's a section where you have to report by intervention topic, by intervention name, information like reach and what kinds of activities were done, and that will be summarized across the state or by agency. And so as Joel mentioned, you'll see that these are very broad sort of setting categories, and that was a decision that we made as a way to summarize California's PSE work. So indeed, they do overlap with setting, and so we just ask you to choose the one that fits the best. So let me show you an example of the intervention name list and the setting name list. So the intervention name list, as you'll see, looks like settings, but in fact is collapsed from the full selection of settings, which is this list. So remember from last year, if you did the PSE reporting, you chose a setting, and this year you will also choose a setting, but you'll also be asked to choose an intervention name. So please just select the one that is the closest to the work that you're doing. We will also, I'll mention this now and then I'll mention again at the end, we plan on making the webinars available, sharing my slides, and then also summarizing the questions that have been asked during the webinar into like an FAQ type document. So we will also share some more detail about the kinds of settings that should be collapsed into these intervention names. So we'll share that also. I didn't want to go through the whole thing in the slide presentation, but we will also share that information in a document. Okay. So remember that you're going to enter both an intervention name and a setting. So this gets a little bit now to where we were talking about how to select a setting. So it may be the case in your work that it seems like more than one setting could apply. So for example, if you were working in a faith-based, the site itself physically was a faith-based setting like a church, for example, but you're reporting on an after-school program, you would choose the most specific setting. So in this example, you would choose an after-school program. So even though it was on the site of a church, for example, you would choose after-school program because you're talking about the after-school program that's at that church. And so you want to, so I want to, now let's see if I can see the question that was there before. So how would you report policy work with a nonprofit that operates with youth on a school site? The nonprofit is separate from the school. So I still see that one as a little bit tricky. I don't know, Sharon, if you have thoughts about that. So it's a I guess I might need a little bit.
Unmute. I believe that the correct site for that is school.
Be school.
Or after school, depending on what it is that they're doing on the school site.
That's what I was thinking too, that I'm not exactly sure what the, Jennifer, I'm not exactly sure what the, oh, it would be, oh, so it's an after-school program. Okay, so does that make sense then, Jennifer, then that it would be an after-school program and you would call it an after-school program even though the physical site was a school? Okay, great, thank you. The one thing I just want to say is that when you're reporting on PSEs that are targeting employees, you're going to choose work site no matter what setting the work site is. Okay, so for example, if you were doing a worksite wellness PSE at a store, you would choose work site, not store for the PSE. You would choose store if you were doing PSE work that was targeting the shoppers of that store. But if you were doing a worksite wellness PSE, you would choose worksite as the PSE setting.
Another example would be if you were working with the employees of the school, you would choose worksite rather than school.
Yes, that's a great example also. Okay, so then a couple of exceptions again to the rule, and those are gardens, bicycle and walking paths, youth organizations, and libraries. And we only would like you to choose those settings if they are standalone. So for example, if you were working and doing some PSE related work at a library in a school, then you would choose school as the setting. If you were doing a garden at a work site, then you would choose work site as the setting. But if in fact you were doing a garden, a standalone garden in an empty lot, for example, then you would choose gardens in the setting list. Or if you were working at a standalone, community library, then you would choose library from your setting list. But if they're a part of another setting and you're doing PSE work in that setting, like a school or a work site, then you would choose those. Okay, so now we have 3 more polls related to choosing settings. So I'll give you guys a couple of minutes to work on these. Okay, I'm just going to wait a couple more seconds. Okay, so go ahead and keep voting if you'd like, but so the first one was you started a walking club and yoga classes for employees at a Walmart store. Which PSE setting would you choose? And in fact, 89% of you said a work site with low-wage workers, and that's correct. The PSE activity is a work site program for employees, so you would choose the work site as the setting site, not bicycle or walking paths or large food stores. You would choose large food store if you were doing a PSE activity that targeted the shoppers at that store. The second one says you revived a school garden and integrated it into the curriculum. Which PSE setting would you choose? And correctly, 92% of you said school. So again, we want to make sure that if you're working in school gardens, to please select school as your setting. And I'll just mention that one of the reasons we want to do that also is because when we look at when we summarize the information by setting and look at schools, we really want to be able to say, like, what's the totality of the work that's happening at schools? So if a lot of the school gardens were listed under gardens, we could go back and get that. It's just a lot more work on our end to have to go and look and say, oh, here's gardens, how many of them are really in schools, so let's move those over to a different setting. So we would just ask that if you're working in school gardens in particular, please put those in school. The same with other settings like work sites and churches and so forth. Please put those in the setting, in the actual physical setting. And then finally, you converted an empty lot into a community garden. Which would you choose? 82% of you, or not change to 79, 79% of you said that you would choose garden, which is correct. There were a few people that said parks and open spaces, and that's one of the things that we're going to do a clearer definition of what an open space means. The intention here is really more around parks. So if it was a garden in a park, you would choose parks. But if it was just an empty lot that was not affiliated with an organization like a park or a church or a school, then you would choose garden for that setting.
And for those of you who feel that your garden work is really important as a garden, we will be able to pick up how much work occurs in gardens by the changes list.
Yes, thank you, Sharon. That's great. I'm glad you said that. So yeah, it will not get lost. We'll still know that garden work is going on when you put it under schools by the changes list. Thank you. That's a great point. Okay, so I'm going to end that polling and go on. Okay, Joel mentioned that there's also another new field called intervention topics. And intervention topics are really getting at the behavioral objectives of your work. And again, we would like you to pick the intervention topics for any and all of the PSEs at that site in question. So you'll see that examples are things like reducing added sugar, active commuting, promoting and maintaining a healthy weight. And so what we would, remember I talked earlier that you might be working in a school both doing environmental changes like smarter lunchrooms and doing something around physical activity. So what we would want you to do here when you choose intervention topics is make sure that you choose the intervention topics for every PSE that you're doing there. So it doesn't matter if it's combining nutrition intervention topics and PA intervention topics, just any intervention topic that's relevant to any and all of the PSE work that's being done there, we would like you to select and choose on that question. And moving on into implementation stages, those of you who worked in the PEARS system last year reported on this. So just remember that you can choose multiple stages. Again, you want to do the same thing, choose for any and all PSEs at that site. So if you're working on a smarter lunchroom PSE and you're just at the planning stage, then you would choose planning. If you're working on a PE PSE or a physical activity PSE, and in this year, in FFY17, you did both planning and beginning implementation, then you would click off implementation for that one. So any stage that you were on for any PSE, you can go ahead and select that. But again, only the stages that occurred during this reporting period. So for FFY17. And this time as last time we had to put dates there, this time there are no dates required. I think that'll make that easier for folks. So no dates are required this year. Joel already talked about attachments. You can attach multiple files. You can attach files that are associated with any section in the module, and we'll make sure to add more detail about what the limitations are on what can be added. Okay, so that was it for the general information. I know there was a lot in that general information section. I have much less for the other sections to go over, but are there any other questions on the general information section? Take a second and see if anybody has anything. Okay, all right, let's go on to the needs, readiness, and effectiveness section. So for each of the types of assessments that are listed there, you can only, right now, you can only add one assessment tool, and there's only one date for baseline and one date for follow-up. Joel mentioned that if you did those assessments on a range of dates, you can just pick the middle date, the beginning date. It doesn't matter that much, just pick a date that's close to the time that you did baseline and follow-up. But for right now, you can only list one assessment tool. And Joel also mentioned that if you didn't report a baseline assessment and you did do one in prior years, you can go ahead and add it here for this year so we can sort of get caught up to what we missed from previous years. We hope in the future that you'll be able to add multiple entries and have multiple assessment tools. But if you did do multiple assessment tools, you could always make a note in the comments and so that you're keeping track of that extra assessment tools were done and that we could see that also. There is a
Lauren, I think that they actually could add more assessment tools in their attachments part at the beginning.
You mean to add the actual tools?
They could, yeah, they could, and then they could make a note of it.
Yes.
And they could add the attachments because they've got unlimited attachments at the beginning.
Yes, you could. Yes, absolutely. You could do that. You could also make a note in the comments, and then you could also attach that tool if you wanted to. There is a note there that you would that we ask you to describe your baseline and follow-up results. And I just wanted to show you an example that UC CalFresh provided for us if you were doing smarter lunchrooms as an example. One way to briefly describe your baseline and follow-up assessments would be to, at baseline, for example, indicate the total score, so 44 out of 100, indicate the areas that were identified for improvement. So you might have noticed in your scoring that promoting vegetables was an area for improvement, having better signage and student involvement. And then when you did your follow-up assessment, you would indicate the new total score at follow-up, which was 54 out of 100 max, and note that there were specific changes made to the cafeteria, that there's now a salad bar offered twice a week, that you added new creative names to the fruit and vegetable items, and that the 5th grade art classes were involved in selecting creative names and making posters to display in the cafeteria. This is an example for smarter lunchrooms, but you could follow a similar template for describing other baseline and follow-up assessments that were done. Okay, so any question on the needs section before we go on to strategy? Okay, well, in the strategy section, I just have a couple of things to say. One is in the complementary activities or the complementary strategies section, you'll note that we would, Joel mentioned this, that marketing includes both marketing and promotion. There were quite a few promotion items that last year were listed in the changes adopted drop-down list that are no longer there. There are a few specific marketing strategies that are still listed in the changes adopted drop-down list, but for the most part, if you did any kind of marketing or promotion related to your PSE activities, as Joel mentioned, then you would check off marketing and promotion in the complementary strategies. In the programs, packages, and initiatives, that's a new feature this year. We're really excited about that. It'll give us an opportunity to know specifically the kinds of programs and any specific packages and initiatives that you're doing as part of your PSE work. As I showed you before, you can select multiple items there. But remember that we're asking for you to pick ones here that you're using in your sites where you're doing PSE activity. You wouldn't select those that were just used for direct education if there wasn't also PSE activity going on at that site and connected to that nutrition education. Okay, any strategy questions? I just had those two things to say before we move on to changes adopted. Okay, in changes adopted, you will only select changes that were initiated, made, or actively maintained during this fiscal year, so for FFY17. We're happy to tell you that the lists have been updated. They're more comprehensive and setting specific, and certainly you can choose all that apply. We want you to choose as many changes as were initiated, made, or maintained during this year. As in last year, they do have to be added one by one. So you will have to add and then go back to the list and add. You'll note that it does say add change now rather than attach change. The attach change wording was a little bit confusing to people. So we asked the PEARS folks to change that to add. So you'll note that, but you will have to go back and add those one by one. Okay, so we're going to talk just a little bit about REACH. Joel mentioned that there's documentation, and there's a link here to that. And you can get to that link through the PEARS system about documentation about how to calculate REACH in each setting. But I just want to start by giving you a definition of unduplicated REACH, which is the unduplicated number of people who come in direct contact with one or more PSE changes at a site over the course of the reporting year. And there are a couple of just key concepts I'll mention that came from that definition. One is direct contact. So we're talking about people who were directly exposed to that PSE change. That it's unduplicated. So for example, if there was the same person, if I was involved in a site that had PSEs and I came in contact with multiple PSEs, so I'm a student at a school, and is exposed to both the Smarter Lunchroom PSE and the PE PSE, and some other physical activity PSE, I'm still just counted one time for the reach at that site. And the same person, if I came in contact with the same PSE, so I saw smarter lunchrooms multiple times every time I went to the cafeteria, I'm still just counted as one person. And then finally, we're looking at per year during the reporting year. So the reach that you report should be an estimate of annual reporting or annual reach. A couple of things that reach is not. So if you're thinking about working on projects that are citywide, like city ordinances or bicycle paths or walking paths, reach is not everyone in the city or even everyone within a certain radius of the site. So I know that there are some places that, for example, get farmers market reach, for example, by looking at the number of people within a X miles of the farmers market. We're not looking to estimate reach that way. It's not the number of people who visit the site, even those not exposed. So we would not include people who visit a site but are not exposed to the PSE. And then for stores, we're going to ask you to use estimated reach based on store size, and those instructions will be updated in the link. There's an estimate for like a small store, medium store, large store, and we'll ask you to use those estimates for store size. And those instructions will be in the link. Okay, so I think there was a question. How do you count same person, multiple contacts across several PSE sites, for example, meal sites? Sorry, I have to process that. Hold on one second. Sharon, do you see that question?
I do.
Okay.
I believe the questioner is talking about somebody who goes to more than one meal site. And I think this is probably one of those cases where that person is going to get counted more than once.
Yeah, I think so. I think there will be cases where we really can't, because we're not keeping data cards, for example, like with direct education, we really can't know that. We can do the best job that we can within a site, within any one particular site, we can do the best job that we can. But I think oftentimes across different settings, even people will be double counted because they could be. We don't know, for example, that if people are at a school, they're going to get counted again, for example, if they go to a market or if they're going to something happening at a park. So we're really just going to be able to look at reach by the intervention types. So I think in some cases, it will be the case that people get double counted.
Yeah, I think that's going to happen at places like food pantries as well.
Right.
We're not tracking people from site to site to site here in California.
Right. Okay, thanks for the question. Okay, so now we have a couple of more polls about reach. I'll give you guys a couple of minutes to answer those. Okay, wait just a couple more seconds. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share or talk about the results here. So the first one asks, what is the reach of efforts to improve the safety of walking and cycling routes to school? And it says the unduplicated number of students during the reporting period who, and the correct, it's really close here. So we have about 35% said attend the school and could walk or bike to school. About 28% said use the improved routes. In the instructions that we're using for REACH, the correct answer would actually be to use the improved routes. So we're looking at people who had direct contact with the PSE change. So we would really want to know the unduplicated number of students who used those new routes, cycling and walking routes. The second one says, what is the reach of physical activity classes offered at a community center? And let's see, we had about 74% who said people who attend the classes, and that's correct. We're looking for, again, direct contact with those changes. So we'll be looking for the unduplicated number of people during the reporting year who attend the classes. Okay, and close that. So any questions, any other questions about REACH before we go on to individual effectiveness? So someone asked a question, can you provide an example of how to document REACH in a retail setting where we did layout and design efforts? We have decided that for this year that we're going to have you count REACH based using estimates that were derived previously, and Sharon, you can talk more about this, but are based on store size, and those will be in the instructions for how to calculate REACH. But I don't know, Sharon, if you want to talk more about that.
Well, I don't think we have a whole lot to say. We spent some time a few years back trying to figure out what seemed like some reasonable numbers for small, medium, and large stores. And for now, I think that's probably the best consistent figure to use.
And the reason that we thought it would make the most sense to do that is just to get more, as Sharon said, to get more consistent numbers for small, medium, and large stores. REACH is very difficult to measure in a retail setting and to try to get unduplicated REACH. So these estimates will give us consistent figures across all of the agencies that are reporting on retail settings. So those instructions will be in the link. I need to update them because they're not there right now, but starting next week, they'll be there. So when you go to start entering your information, those instructions will be available. Okay, so just a couple more slides and we're running out of time. So just a couple more slides. We already talked about individual effectiveness. Remember, it's required to add all of the tools that you use, if any. So just be sure and select all of the different instruments and tools that you use to measure individual effectiveness. It's optional to choose the indicators and measures. So if you didn't measure any of those, you don't have to answer them, but likely you did. So it would be great. And if you need any help determining which indicators are associated with the instruments that you use, please feel free to reach out to your SIA evaluation lead to ask about that. If you do choose an indicator, remember that the ST, the short-term indicators, are goals and intentions related to, for example, healthy eating, whereas the MT indicators are behavior change related to healthy eating. So the first ones are really about changes in goals and intentions as a result of participating in SNAP-Ed activities or PSEs, and the MT indicators are around behavior change after exposure, before and after exposure to SNAP-Ed activities or direct education. And then you can certainly, there's a link there for more information and links to the SNAP-Ed evaluation framework for more information on the indicators, or again, please reach out to your SIA lead. Okay, last couple of slides. I really just had one thing to say under recognition and media coverage, and that is Joel talked about a place where you can provide a link or reference details. If you don't have those or it's not easily available, then you can type none there, because I think that's a required field, so you can just type none there so that something gets filled in there. Joel also mentioned that the entire reflection section is optional. You can list up to 5 barriers and 5 assets, but you certainly don't have to. You may not have 5 barriers or 5 assets, so it's fine to select fewer than 5. You don't have to include if there's a lot of minor barriers and assets, we're really looking at the ones that had an impact on your work at that site. And then finally, we talked about this last year if you did PSE reporting last year, but you'll see and notice that the barrier list and the asset list are the same. And that's really because the same items can be either barriers or assets. For example, if you have high staff turnover, that's a barrier. If you have low staff turnover, that's an asset. Same with consumer demand, buy-in, and motivation. So you'll notice that those two lists are the same, and that's why. And I think that's it, except to say that I know that for CDPH, several of you have a NEOP-B have sent in requests for usernames and accounts. I've gotten to maybe about half of them, and I will try to finish those up over the weekend. If from the other state implementing agencies, you can contact your PSE lead or your evaluation lead if you need users to be added and to get their PEARS accounts. One really important thing is that PSE reporting this year must be completed by October 6th. And the system is up and ready and running and ready for you to start on Monday. So Monday, August 21st, you can start entering your information. And everything must be entered by October 6th. I think, and Sharon, you can help me clarify this, I think there are some people who have entered some PSE information already because the system doesn't really shut down completely. We had just asked folks to please not enter anything until we were done making updates. So Sharon, I believe that anything that's been entered up until Sunday is going to be marked as incomplete. Is that right?
That is correct. Everything is going to be marked incomplete over the weekend, and what that means is that you're going to need to go into anything that you've entered, and you're going to have to make any corrections and changes to reflect all of the updates that have been made within the last month or two into the PSC module. So don't go thinking you finished something, because it's going to need to be brought up to date.
So for those of you who entered anything prior to Monday, you'll just go back in, double check everything, because there were some updates made to the system. And so you'll just have to go back in and update things and make sure that you've answered all of the questions, because there's new questions that you may not have answered yet. So you didn't lose anything. You didn't lose what you had already entered, but you'll just may need to update those.
And Lauren, I'll add in that as the deadline approaches, we'll be generating emails about that deadline reminders, but we will also be sending emails specifically as the time gets closer to those who have incomplete items. So if something of yours does get marked as incomplete over the weekend and you don't go back in and complete it, you will get an email later on reminding you that you still have incomplete things in PEARS.
Perfect.
And one other thing, I know that people who have been signing up for a long time are accustomed to being able to plead for extensions. You will not get an extension. The KSU shuts the system off when the deadline occurs. So please be aware that October 6th is a hard deadline.
Thank you, Sharon. I think that's really important, because we really have, in the past we've been able to be a little bit more flexible, but we really need this to be entered in time to meet that deadline. So thank you. There was a question about whether the webinar recording will be available. Yes, next week we will send out information about where to hear the webinar. I think we'll be able to post the link to them once I get that from the PEARS team at KSU on the training calendar, where often things are listed. We'll make the webinar available through that, and then we'll let everybody know where that's going to be. And then someone asked about, and along with, as I mentioned earlier, along with the webinar, we'll also have my slides if those are helpful, and then also our FAQ document that summarizes some of the questions that people asked during the webinars. And then somebody asked, what is the training plan for implementing direct education into PEARS? There will be webinars for that, Joel, probably in October. Is that right? Is that what we're thinking? In early October, probably?
Correct. We don't have hard dates and times yet, but we are planning those for October to do a thorough overview of all the other modules in PEARS.
Does anyone else have any other questions? Because we are on the nose, I think, 3 o'clock. So any other questions? Oh, sorry, let's see. So Samuel Center was asking if there's guidance for LHDs who work with subcontractors for establishing access to PEARS. Excuse me. Different LHDs are doing this differently. So some of the local health departments will be entering their PEARS data, like gathering data from their subcontractors and entering the information themselves. Others are giving direct access to subcontractors to do that. So it's really up to the local health department to decide who will be doing the data entry into PEARS. And whatever that decision is, they can just, for right now, contact their state lead about getting an account established for PEARS. So if it's at NEOP for right now, it's not going to be me the whole time, but for right now, you can just email me and I will get that to the right person. And then there's also the list that Joel showed you in the directory, I believe it's called, that shows who is able to manage users.
Lauren, one thing I will note about access to PEARS, for those who have used PEARS before, then you should be able to log in as you did before. Your password should still be the same, and if you forgot that, there's a forgot password link. For those of you who haven't ever logged into PEARS, then on Monday morning, by the time it'll be in Central Time, so by the time you guys get into the office on Monday morning, you should see a welcome email with a link to set up your password, and that's when you'll be able to log into PEARS and start entering data. So again, that'll be Monday morning. If by Monday afternoon you have not received that email, feel free to reach out to our support team, and we'd be happy to help you figure that out.
Any other questions? All right, well, thank you everybody for attending on a Friday afternoon. We hope that there was good attendance at all three, so we hope that we reached many of the people who are going to be working in the PEARS system reporting PSEs this year. And again, there will be, we'll make the webinar available, and we're here for providing assistance if need be when you're filling out your report. So we look forward to working with you all and seeing the great information for PSEs that you enter for us. Everyone have a great weekend.
Yep, have a good weekend.